small Hurricane Beryl continues towards the Leeward and Windward Islands this morning. I'm Mike Naso from the YouTube Tropical Video Update page with the latest on Hurricane Beryl. And as you can see, the entire Atlantic Basin right now, we've got a lot of features for early July. We have Hurricane Beryl down here, which is very tiny. I mean, it's barely discernible from this far vantage point. We have a new tropical depression off the coast of the Carolinas, which is actually forecast to become another hurricane. It should loop around and eventually move on out. Right now, not looking that great. And as you can see, another huge tropical wave leaving Africa. It's still kind of early, but look at Beryl, you know, so who knows? We got to keep an eye on everything during hurricane season. Now here's the latest on Hurricane Beryl as of 5 a.m. Eastern Time. It was at 11.1 north, 49.8 west. Winds were down to 75 miles an hour. It's looking a little weaker this morning, moving west-northwest at 14, 995 millibars. And we do have watches and warnings. Hurricane watch for Dominica, of course, which was devastated by Hurricane Maria last September. We also have a tropical storm watch in effect for Barbados, St. Lucia, Martinique, Guadeloupe, St. Martin, and St. Barthélemy, with the expectation that Beryl will be either a strong tropical storm or even a hurricane as it moves through the islands and then eventually dissipate somewhere in the central or eastern Caribbean Sea by Tuesday morning. However, it could still bring gusty, blustery winds, high surf, and rainfall areas of the Greater Antilles further out, and some of the computer models even show Beryl moving on up towards the Bahamas and affecting that area as some sort of an entity down the road by midweek. And so we're going to have to keep an eye on it down the road, whatever becomes of it. Now here's the latest infrared satellite imagery. We don't have the visible up yet. The sun's just coming up over the central Atlantic, and clearly you can see it's lost that little coiled eye it had yesterday, and it appears as though the circulation center is somewhere in here on the northwestern side of the convective blob, and that would not be that favorable for development. Also notice these clouds shooting here. This is a sign that it's starting to feel some sort of wind shear and perhaps dry air entrainment. Earlier it looked like it sucked in some dry air and that convection really weakened. So Beryl is not looking all that great, certainly not as good as it looked 24 hours ago. Nonetheless, it's still estimated to be a hurricane right now, and since it's very small, it can go up or down in intensity very quickly, which is why, like the Hurricane Center said, this one's kind of a puzzling forecast intensity-wise. Nonetheless, it still has a moisture envelope with it, and it is still moving off now towards the west-northwest, finally starting to gain some latitude. Now, before I show the shear and sea surface temperature maps, I wanted to tell you about Tropical Depression 3. As of 5 a.m., it was at 33.2 north, 74.6 west, winds were 30. It's moving very slowly north-northwest at 5, and the pressure is way up there over 1,000 millibars. And right now, it's not looking all that great. However, as it meanders here with warm waters and increasingly favorable conditions, it looks like, it should be able to become a hurricane as it accelerates by mid to late week out towards the northeast. It should stay away from the U.S. East Coast. However, high surf, for one thing, will be a problem, and you still have to watch it because it's always possible that it gets close enough to where it might have a direct impact. Right now you can see the computer models are keeping it offshore, but currently it's drifting towards the northwest, which would bring it into the Outer Banks. That is expected to loop back around and head out to sea. Nevertheless, another system in early July and close to the U.S., closer than Beryl, so we got to keep an eye on this one. If it does become a storm and a hurricane, it would be Hurricane Chris this year. You can see there's the water vapor imagery of our system, and you can see it's finally really starting to burst, but very disorganized. There's an upper level low still shearing it that's currently situated over northern Florida. That should retrograde westward, and you can see this kind of frontal system moving right off the Carolinas. All that very unfavorable, a lot of dry air here. However, as the system gets trapped in weak steering currents, it should begin to intensify, and those thunderstorms flaring up might be able to bring it to a tropical storm status later today. So here's the shear map. This is the shear tendency charts, and you can see we have two situations. We have Beryl headed into high wind shear, and we have our tropical depression looking like wind shear's dropping around it. So this one should be on the way up, whereas Beryl should be on the way down, and you can see that even better on the actual shear charts. Look at this strong wind shear coming right into view, and it's starting to have an impact as the tiny circulation of the hurricane moves right into it, and that's why dissipation is likely in the Caribbean Sea. Now, if it gets back out over the Bahamas in a couple of days, and there's still something to it, maybe we could see some redevelopment, but as of right now, that's not anticipated. On the other hand, our depression south and southeast of the Carolinas is in much less strong areas of shear, and that should allow it to intensify into a tropical storm, and then as it begins to accelerate into a hurricane. Now, the sea surface temperatures are also something to deal with, because we have much cooler than normal water out here, and that's where Hurricane Beryl is headed. However, we have a lot of hot water close to land, and that's exactly where our tropical depression is going to be brewing, right here near the Gulf Stream. Very hot waters off the Carolinas. So it does look more favorable for our system off the Carolinas to strengthen in the next couple of days than it does for Hurricane Beryl to strengthen. And if it does strengthen, it won't strengthen for long. It'll probably be weakening right after it moves through the islands or as it moves through. But nevertheless, we have the watches and warnings because as of right now, it's still a hurricane and it's taking aim at areas of the Leeward and Windward Islands. So we're going to continue to watch Hurricane Beryl and our tropical depression. I'm Mike Naso. Stay tuned. We'll have more next time.